In a small, quiet research facility, a team of scientists prepared for what they believed would be an ordinary experiment. Their goal was simple: to study what happens to a body after it is buried. This research was expected to help forensic experts solve mysteries about how bodies change over time underground. The scientists were determined to make discoveries that could help law enforcement and science. Dr. Emily Carter, the team leader, was an experienced scientist with a passion for finding answers to unusual questions. She had spent years researching similar topics, and this project felt like the next big step in her career. "This isn't just science," she often said. "This is about uncovering the truth." The team had received permission to use an unclaimed body for their study. The body belonged to a man with no known family or friends. It felt strange, almost eerie, to work with someone who had lived a life unknown to anyone. Yet, the scientists knew they had to focus on the data, not the emotions. The plan was to install a small camera inside the coffin. The camera was no ordinary device. It was specially designed to handle complete darkness and extreme conditions. It could record every detail inside the coffin without interruption for months. The scientists wanted to capture the natural processes that occur after burial. They believed it would give them new insights into how bodies decompose in different environments. As the team prepared the camera, excitement buzzed in the lab. "This will be groundbreaking," said Ryan, the youngest scientist on the team. "No one has ever recorded this before." Emily nodded, sharing his enthusiasm. "If everything works as planned, we'll have data that could change how we understand decomposition." After carefully placing the camera inside the coffin, the scientists sealed it shut. The coffin was then buried in a special area where sensors were installed to monitor temperature, pressure, and other environmental factors. The entire setup was designed to provide a complete picture of what happened inside and outside the coffin. Once the burial was complete, the team returned to their lab to monitor the equipment. At first, everything seemed normal. The sensors were working perfectly, and the camera transmitted clear images. It showed the lifeless body lying still, surrounded by darkness. For days, the scientists eagerly waited to see what the camera would reveal. They didn't expect anything unusual at first. They knew the changes they were studying would take time. However, as the days passed, a few of the sensors started to behave oddly. Temperature readings fluctuated without explanation, and the pressure sensors showed inconsistent results. Ryan noticed the anomalies first. "That's strange," he said, frowning at the screen. "These numbers don't make sense." Emily brushed it off. "It could be a technical glitch. Let's keep monitoring. We can review the camera footage later to see if there's anything unusual." Despite her calm words, a small sense of unease crept into the lab. The team had no idea that their groundbreaking experiment was about to take a shocking turn. Little did they know, the camera they had placed in the coffin was about to reveal something that would change their lives forever. The lab was buzzing with quiet anticipation as the scientists monitored the early data from their experiment. The coffin, equipped with a high-tech camera and various sensors, had been buried just 2 days ago. The team had spent years preparing for this project, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. But the slight anomalies in the data were already stirring curiosity. Ryan, the youngest scientist on the team, had spent the night studying the readings. "The temperature keeps dropping and then spiking," he said, showing the data to Dr. Emily Carter. "It's not consistent with what we expected." Emily adjusted her glasses and peered at the screen. "It's unusual," she admitted, "but it could be an environmental factor we didn't account for. The soil might be affecting the sensors." To ensure the equipment was functioning properly, the team decided to double-check their setup. The sensors outside the coffin were tested, and everything seemed to be working perfectly. "No malfunctions," said Sarah, the team's lead technician. "The equipment is fine." Emily nodded. "Then we'll keep monitoring. If the data keeps acting strange, we'll review the camera footage sooner than planned." As the hours passed, the sense of mystery grew. The data coming from the coffin didn't align with their expectations. Not only were the temperature and pressure readings fluctuating, but the motion sensors also recorded slight activity. This puzzled the team, as the body inside was supposed to remain completely still. "It's probably a false reading," said Mark, the data analyst. "Motion sensors can be sensitive. Maybe it picked up vibrations from the soil." Ryan, however, wasn't convinced. "It feels like something else," he said quietly, his voice tinged with unease. "Shouldn't we check the footage?" Emily hesitated. The experiment was carefully planned, and the team had agreed to review the footage only after a full week. Still, the anomalies were hard to ignore. "Let's give it one more day," she said. "If the data remains this inconsistent, we'll review the video early." That evening, as the lab grew quiet, Emily found herself alone in her office, thinking about the project. She had always been logical and scientific, but something about this experiment felt different. The unclaimed body, the unusual data, and the growing tension among the team. It all felt heavier than she expected. The next morning, the team reconvened. The anomalies in the data had only grown stranger. This time, the motion sensors recorded more activity, and the pressure readings suggested something inside the coffin was shifting. "I don't think we can wait any longer," Ryan said firmly. "We need to see what's happening." Emily agreed. "All right," she said, standing up. "Let's review the footage. If something's wrong, we need to know now." The team gathered in the lab, their eyes fixed on the monitor as Sarah prepared to access the recorded footage. The room was silent except for the hum of the equipment. Emily's heart raced as she watched the screen, unsure of what they were about to see. As the first video began to play, the camera showed the inside of the coffin. At first, everything looked normal. The body lay still, exactly as it had when the coffin was sealed. The scientists watched in silence, their nerves on edge. Then, just as they started to relax, the screen flickered. A faint sound, almost like a whisper, came through the speakers. The team froze, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. "What was that?" Sarah whispered. Before anyone could answer, the screen flickered again. This time, they saw something that made their hearts stop. The lab fell silent as the video played on the monitor. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a flicker, a common technical glitch. But then, the faint whispering sound grew louder, sending shivers down everyone's spine. "Replay that part," Emily said, her voice steady but laced with tension. Sarah rewound the footage and played it again. The screen showed the lifeless body lying still in the coffin. Then, without warning, the screen flickered once more, and the body appeared to shift ever so slightly. It wasn't a natural movement. It was sharp and jerky, almost unnatural. Did it just move?" Ryan stammered, his eyes glued to the screen. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Emily tried to stay calm. "It could be the camera angle," she said, though even she didn't believe her own words. "Play it further." The footage continued. The coffin's interior was dark, illuminated only by the faint light of the camera. For several seconds, nothing happened. The team began to breathe easier, convincing themselves it was all a misunderstanding. But just as they started to relax, the body's hand twitched. A collective gasp filled the room. "No way," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This can't be real." The whispering sound returned, but this time it was louder. It wasn't words, exactly, but a soft, rhythmic noise that sent chills down their spines. The team stared at the monitor, too stunned to speak. Then it happened. The body's eyes snapped open. A piercing scream erupted from the speakers, so loud and sudden that Sarah almost fell off her chair. The scientists jumped back, their hearts pounding in their chests. The body's face turned toward the camera, its eyes wide and unblinking. "No, this isn't possible," Ryan shouted, his voice trembling. The screen flickered violently, and the whispering turned into a low, guttural sound. The camera shook, as if something inside the coffin was trying to grab it. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the video went black. The team sat in stunned silence, the only sound in the room the rapid beeping of one of the machines monitoring the experiment. No one moved. No one spoke. They all stared at the blank screen, struggling to process what they had just seen. Emily was the first to break the silence. "Check the equipment," she ordered, trying to steady her voice. "It has to be a malfunction." Sarah hesitated but nodded, quickly running diagnostics on the camera. After a few minutes, she looked up, her face pale. "There's nothing wrong with the camera," she said. "It's working perfectly." Emily's hands trembled as she rubbed her temples. "There has to be an explanation," she said, though her voice wavered with doubt. "Bodies don't move, and they certainly don't open their eyes. What if he wasn't dead?" Ryan suggested, his voice shaking. "That's not possible," Mark interjected. "We verified the death certificate. He was pronounced dead weeks ago." Emily tried to think logically, but the image of the body staring at the camera haunted her. "We need to stop the experiment," she said finally. "Something isn't right." Before the team could respond, the screen flickered back on. The scientists froze, staring at the monitor as the camera inside the coffin began transmitting again. The image was blurry at first, but as it cleared, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The body was no longer lying flat. It was sitting upright, staring directly at the camera, with an expression that could only be described as aware. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening, until the screen went black again. This time, the silence in the lab was absolute. "What do we do now?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No one had an answer. The team sat frozen in the lab, their minds racing with fear and confusion. The image of the body sitting upright and staring into the camera replayed in their heads like a nightmare. No one dared to speak for several minutes. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "We need answers," she said firmly, though her voice betrayed her unease. "Let's go over everything step by step. We have to figure out what's happening." Sarah, still pale from the shock, nodded and began checking the equipment. "The camera's working perfectly," she confirmed. "It's not a malfunction. Whatever we saw, it was real." Ryan shook his head, his hands trembling as he gestured at the monitor. "Real? How can that be real? That body has been dead for weeks. Dead bodies don't just sit up and stare at cameras." Emily tried to remain calm, even as her own doubts gnawed at her. "We need to stay rational," she said. "Let's check the sensors. Maybe they can tell us more." Mark quickly pulled up the data from the sensors buried with the coffin. His face darkened as he analyzed the readings. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered. "The motion sensors are still picking up movement inside the coffin, and the pressure readings are rising." "Rising?" Emily repeated, her brows furrowing. "How is that possible?" "It's like something is pushing against the inside of the coffin," Mark explained, his voice shaky, almost as if someone's trying to get out. A chill swept through the room. Emily felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to focus. "We need to consider every possibility," she said. "Could the body have been in some sort of rare medical state? Something that mimics death?" Sarah frowned, typing rapidly on her computer. "I'll check the medical records again," she said. "But even if he was in a suspended state, he would have woken up before now, wouldn't he?" Ryan was pacing the room now, his anxiety spilling over. "This is insane," he said. "We buried him. He's underground. How could he still be alive?" Emily shot him a look. "Ryan, calm down. Panicking won't help us figure this out." But deep down, she couldn't deny that Ryan's fear mirrored her own. What if they had buried someone alive? What if their experiment had gone horribly wrong? After an hour of combing through data and records, Sarah found something. "Here," she said, pointing to her screen. "The man had a rare condition called catalepsy. It's extremely rare, but in some cases, It can mimic death. No pulse, no breathing, nothing. Emily leaned in to read the report, so he could have been alive when he was buried. Sarah nodded hesitantly. It's possible. But even then, surviving in a coffin for weeks. That's impossible. Ryan, who had stopped pacing, spoke up. Unless something else is happening. What do you mean? Emily asked, narrowing her eyes. Ryan hesitated before answering. What if this isn't just science? What if something we can't explain is at play here? The room fell silent again. No one wanted to admit it, but the thought had crossed all their minds. The whispering sounds, the unnatural movements, and the terrifying stare from the body. It all pointed to something beyond their understanding. Emily took a deep breath. We can't jump to conclusions. We need to investigate further. I want the coffin exhumed. We need to see it with our own eyes. The team looked at her in shock. Exhume it? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You mean, open it? Yes, Emily said firmly. We can't ignore what's happening. If there's any chance he's alive, we need to know. As the team reluctantly agreed, a sense of dread hung over them. None of them wanted to admit it, but they all feared what they might find when the coffin was opened. The decision was made. The team had agreed to exhume the coffin, though no one was quite sure what to expect. Emily's hands were shaking slightly as she stood in the small room, looking at the team's equipment. They had already gathered all the necessary tools to dig up the coffin. Despite the fact that they had spent weeks preparing for this experiment, they were now facing something that seemed beyond their control. It was early morning when the team arrived at the site. The sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The area where the coffin had been buried was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of city life far beyond the cemetery gates. Emily could feel the weight of the moment as they approached the grave. Ryan stood beside her, his usual enthusiasm replaced with nervous energy. Are we really going to do this? He asked, glancing at the others. I mean, what if? What if we're wrong? What if there's nothing to find? Emily nodded slowly. She had been asking herself the same questions, but one thing was clear. They couldn't leave things as they were. Not after what they had seen on the footage. We have to know, she replied firmly. We need answers. The team went to work, carefully digging around the area where the coffin had been placed. The earth was heavy and dense, and the process was slow. As each shovelful of dirt was removed, the sense of anticipation grew. Every minute felt like an hour. The quiet whispers in the back of Emily's mind urged her to reconsider, but she pushed them aside. The curiosity and fear was too strong to ignore. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the top of the coffin. The earth was cleared away, revealing the wooden box beneath. It looked just as it had when it was first buried, sealed and undisturbed. But now, it seemed to hold an ominous weight, like it was hiding a secret too terrifying to imagine. Ryan wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. We're almost there, he said quietly. Let's just get this over with. Emily nodded. Prepare the tools. We're opening it. Sarah, who had been standing back, handed Emily a crowbar. Be careful, she warned. We don't know what we're dealing with. The team gathered around as Emily pried the lid of the coffin open. The sound of wood creaking echoed in the cold air. With a final pull, the lid was lifted, revealing the body inside. At first, everything appeared normal. The body lay there, just as it had when it was buried, but something felt wrong. The air seemed heavier, as if it was thick with tension. Emily felt her heart racing. She could hardly bring herself to look at the body. But then she saw it. The body was no longer in the same position it had been when it was buried. The legs, once neatly folded, were now sprawled unnaturally. The arms, which had been resting at the sides, were positioned differently, as if the body had shifted during its time in the ground. Did it move? Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. Emily didn't respond immediately. She was staring at the body, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The skin looked the same, pale and lifeless, but there was no denying the change in position. Something had happened. Mark leaned in, carefully examining the body. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "How could it have moved? It's impossible." The team fell silent, unsure of what to do next. There were no signs of life. The body was still cold, and there was no sign of any breathing or pulse. But the way it had shifted, it didn't add up. Emily turned to Sarah. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. I can't explain this. It's not possible for a body to shift like this without some kind of external force." Just then, as if on cue, the camera inside the coffin blinked back to life. The team jumped back in shock. The camera, which they had thought was offline, began transmitting again. The footage showed the body, now sitting upright, its eyes wide open, staring straight into the camera. The team froze in horror. It was the same image they had seen on the monitor before. The body was not just alive. It was aware. The camera's sudden return to life made everyone jump back in shock. The body, now sitting upright in the coffin, stared directly at the lens with wide, unblinking eyes. The team was frozen in place, staring at the screen. No one knew what to say or what to do. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves in the wind and the sound of distant city life. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process what she was seeing. "This can't be real," she whispered to herself, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince the others or herself. Ryan, unable to look away from the screen, finally found his voice. "What is happening? How is this even possible?" Mark, the data analyst, was busy at his computer, quickly pulling up the live data from the camera and the sensors. His fingers trembled as he typed. "This doesn't make sense," he said quietly, shaking his head. "There's no reason for this to be happening. The sensors and the equipment are all functioning perfectly. Everything is working as it should. But nothing about what they were seeing could be explained by science. The body was in a state of impossible stillness, yet its eyes were wide open, staring with an intensity that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. It was as if it was watching them, aware of their every move. "Check the medical records again," Emily ordered, trying to stay focused despite the overwhelming fear creeping into her thoughts. "There has to be an explanation for this. Something we missed." Sarah, the technician, quickly pulled up the information again. "He was supposed to be dead," she said, her voice shaking slightly. The doctor confirmed it. "No pulse, no breathing. Everything pointed to death. But if there's a chance he was in some kind of suspended animation, a rare medical condition," Emily interrupted, trying to recall the name. "Catalepsy." "Yes," Sarah replied, nodding. "A person with catalepsy can appear dead, no signs of life at all. But they're still alive. The body enters a state that can mimic death. But this..." Sarah trailed off, unable to finish her sentence. "This is something else entirely." Ryan stepped forward, his voice trembling. "But if he wasn't dead, why didn't he wake up sooner? Why did he stay in the coffin for so long?" Emily looked at him, her expression serious. "We don't have answers. We need to figure out how he survived down there, if he was alive at all. There's something we're missing." The team continued to watch the footage, their eyes glued to the screen. The body in the coffin remained upright, its gaze fixed on them, as if it was aware of their presence. No movement, no breathing, just those haunting eyes. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Emily said firmly. "Let's bring in experts. We need a forensic team, a medical team, anyone who might have answers." Mark hesitated. "What if this goes beyond science? What if there's something else at work here? I'm not sure we're ready for what we might find." Emily didn't answer right away. She stared at the screen, trying to think clearly. Every instinct told her to stop the experiment, to close everything down and walk away. But they had come this far, and they couldn't just give up now. "No," she said quietly. "We can't stop now. We need to understand what happened. We need to find out if this man is alive, or if we're dealing with something we can't explain." The team gathered around, looking at each other with a mix of fear and determination. They knew they couldn't back out now. The truth was out there, hidden in the coffin, and they had to uncover it. But deep down, each of them knew that whatever they found next would change everything. The decision to call in experts was made. Emily knew they couldn't solve this mystery on their own, not without risking even more confusion or danger. The events of the past few hours were impossible to explain with anything they knew about science. It felt like they were stepping into the unknown, into a place where the boundaries of life and death blurred. The team worked quickly to contact a group of forensic experts. Emily explained the situation in as much detail as possible, but even her calm voice couldn't hide the fear that had settled in her stomach. The whole team was on edge, their nerves raw from what they had witnessed. When the forensic team arrived, the tension in the air was thick. The experts were experienced, but the look on their faces told Emily that they, too, felt a sense of unease as they approached the coffin. The body still sat upright inside, its unblinking eyes staring into the distance. It was as if it was waiting for something or someone. The forensic team began their examination, taking careful notes and running tests. They checked the body's temperature, its skin tone, its condition. They even ran advanced scans to search for any signs of life. Despite all their efforts, the results were the same. The body showed no signs of life. No pulse, no breath, no movement. It was just as lifeless as when it had first been buried. But Emily could see the doubt on their faces. They had expected to find some medical explanation, some condition that would explain what was happening. But all they had were more questions. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the lead forensic scientist, said, shaking her head. "It doesn't make sense. We can't find any logical reason for the body to have moved, to have opened its eyes." Emily nodded slowly, her mind racing. "Is there any chance it's something more than science? Something we can't explain?" Dr. Hayes looked at her, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion. "It's hard to say. But without evidence, we can't jump to conclusions." But the way the body sat there, motionless except for the strange flicker of life in its eyes, told a different story. There was something more at play here. And as much as they wanted to explain it away with science, deep down, Emily knew that they were dealing with something beyond their understanding. They continued to study the body, and after several more hours of examination, a startling discovery was made. Hidden beneath the skin of the body, the team found small, strange markings. They weren't tattoos, and they weren't scars. They appeared to be symbols, ancient-looking, carved deep into the flesh. Emily's heart skipped a beat when she saw the markings. "What are those?" she whispered. Dr. Hayes leaned in closer to examine them. "These symbols, they don't match anything I've ever seen before," she said. "They're unlike any known language or writing system." The room grew cold as the team processed this new information. The symbols seemed almost intentional, as if someone had deliberately marked the body. "Could it be a ritual?" Sarah asked softly. "A form of resurrection?" Emily shook her head. "No, that's not possible. We're in the world of science here. There has to be a logical explanation." But the more they looked at the symbols, the more they began to feel the weight of something darker in the air. The body, with its unblinking stare and unnatural position, felt like more than just a body. It felt like a warning. As the team continued to study the markings, the whispers returned. This time, they were louder, clearer. The sound seemed to come from the body itself, but when Emily looked at the screen, the body was still. It hadn't moved. The whispers grew louder and more frantic, as if they were calling out to her. "Emily." Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. "What if this isn't just a body anymore? What if it's something else?" Emily stared at the screen, the weight of his words sinking in. The body might have been dead once, but now it was something else, something that refused to be explained. And whatever it was watching them. The room was filled with a heavy, suffocating silence as Emily stared at the body in front of her. The whispers from the camera grew louder, more urgent, and they seemed to echo inside her mind. She tried to focus, but the unsettling feeling that something beyond science was at play was impossible to ignore. Every instinct in her body screamed that they were on the edge of something they weren't prepared to understand. The forensic team was still examining the body, but their faces had become increasingly worried. Dr. Hayes, the lead expert, turned to Emily with a look of disbelief. "I've never encountered anything like this in my entire career," she admitted. "The markings on the skin, they don't make sense. They aren't just random. They look like symbols, but they're unlike anything I've seen before." Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she looked at the strange markings on the body. They were etched into the flesh, almost like tattoos, but more intricate, more purposeful. Each symbol seemed to pulse with an energy that was hard to define. It was as though the body itself was alive in some way, even if it appeared lifeless. Could they be some sort of ancient script? Emily asked, trying to rationalize what she was seeing. "I don't know," Dr. Hayes replied, her voice shaky. "They don't resemble any known languages or symbols. I've sent photos to colleagues at universities, but no one has been able to identify them." Ryan, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "Could this be a ritual? Something supernatural?" he asked, his voice low and filled with uncertainty. Emily hesitated. She had always believed in logic, in facts, and she refused to entertain the idea of the supernatural. But as she looked at the body, with its eerie symbols and strange energy, she couldn't ignore the nagging thought in the back of her mind. Maybe they were dealing with something beyond their understanding. "We have to keep thinking scientifically," Emily said, forcing herself to stay focused. "We need to find a logical explanation. We can't jump to conclusions." But deep down, she knew they were treading on dangerous ground. This wasn't just a medical mystery anymore. It was something else. Something ancient. Something far older than they could have ever imagined. As the hours passed, the team continued their investigation. They took samples of the skin and blood, running tests in the hopes of finding something that could explain what had happened to the body. But every test came back with nothing that made sense. The body was in perfect condition, showing no signs of decay or decomposition, despite having been buried for weeks. Then, just when Emily thought they couldn't find anything more, the camera began transmitting again. The screen flickered to life, and the body inside the coffin seemed to shift. The arms, once lying at the sides, slowly raised, as if the body was trying to sit up. Ryan gasped. "Is it moving?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The body's eyes remained wide open, staring directly at the camera. It wasn't just staring, it was observing, as if aware of the team's presence. The whispers were back, louder this time, almost frantic, and Emily felt a deep sense of dread wash over her. She could hear the voice now, faint but clear. "Help me." "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her face pale as she turned to Emily. Emily nodded, her own face drained of color. It's talking. The body is speaking to us." The words echoed in her mind, and she felt an overwhelming need to understand what was happening. Was the body truly alive? Was it speaking from some place beyond death? Or was it simply the result of an unknown medical condition, something that science had yet to explain? "We need to get it out of there," Emily said, her voice urgent. "Whatever is happening, we need to figure it out. We can't leave it like this." The team was divided. Some were terrified, unsure of what they might uncover if they opened the coffin again. Others, like Emily, felt driven by an unexplainable need to understand what was going on. Finally, Emily made the decision. They had to open the coffin again, no matter the consequences. They had to know the truth. The decision was made. Despite the fear and uncertainty gripping the team, Emily knew they couldn't stop now. They had to know the truth. There was no going back. The body in the coffin, the strange symbols, the whispers, it was all leading to something they couldn't ignore. The team gathered around the coffin once again. The air was thick with tension. Every sound, every movement felt amplified. The body lay still inside, its eyes wide open, staring out at them from the dark confines of the coffin. The camera still transmitted its eerie footage, showing the body that seemed to watch them, as if it knew they were coming. Emily felt a cold chill creep down her spine as she picked up the crowbar. "Let's get this over with," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She wasn't sure if she was reassuring the others or herself. The team watched in silence as Emily pried open the coffin. The wood creaked and groaned as the lid lifted, the sound echoing in the stillness of the cemetery. As the lid was removed, they all leaned forward, staring into the coffin, bracing themselves for whatever they might find. For a moment, everything seemed still. The body lay exactly as it had before, motionless, cold, and unchanging. But something about it was different. The silence in the air was suffocating, and the whispers had stopped. It felt as though the world was holding its breath. Then Emily saw it. The body's chest, once still, was rising and falling, slowly and faintly. It was breathing. The lifeless corpse was alive. The shock of the moment hit Emily like a wave. "No," she whispered, unable to believe what she was seeing. This can't be real." But it was. The body was breathing. The eyes, which had once been wide open and staring, were now moving, slowly blinking as if adjusting to the light. The lips trembled. And then, to the horror of the team, a low, raspy voice emerged from the body's mouth. "Please, help me." The team recoiled in terror. The voice was unmistakable. It was human, but it came from the body that should have been dead, the body that they had buried weeks ago. Sarah, trembling, stepped back, almost falling over. It's alive," she gasped, her face pale as a ghost. Ryan could barely speak. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice shaking with fear. "How can this be?" Emily stood frozen in place, unable to process what she was seeing. She had known there was something strange happening, but this was beyond comprehension. The body was alive, yet it had been buried, thought to be dead. The body's mouth opened again, this time with more effort. "You shouldn't have opened it," it rasped, its voice strained but clear. "Now it will come for you." The words sent a wave of panic through the team. Whatever was happening to the body, it was not natural. And if it had spoken once, it could speak again. "We have to stop this," Emily said, her voice desperate as she stepped back from the coffin. "We need to call for help. We need more experts. This is beyond us." But as the words left her mouth, something even stranger began to happen. The camera flickered again, showing the body now sitting up in the coffin. It moved with unnatural speed, its arms reaching out as if it were trying to escape. The symbols on its skin began to glow faintly, pulsing with an eerie light. Emily's heart raced. Whatever had happened to this body, it was now fully awake, and it was no longer just a body. It was something else, something they couldn't explain. The whispers returned, louder now. The team could hear them all around them, like 1,000 voices in the air, all chanting in unison. Emily's head spun as the room seemed to close in around her. She knew they were in danger, but she couldn't bring herself to look away. The body, with its glowing symbols and eerie movements, was no longer just an experiment. It was a warning they had ignored. And now, it was too late.